You go to the doctor, and then you talk to him, and you say, you have this big gash in your arm. The doctor, he does his little charts. Or actually, don't write them anymore. I think they say them into a microphone, and then somebody else writes them. He doesn't say that you have a big gash in your arm. That's not on your chart. What do you say? A laceration. Yes, a laceration. If you step on a nail, it's a puncture.
Puncture wound.
Yes. See, I stepped on a nail. I got a hole in my foot. And the doctor says, well, you have a puncture wound. And that language is important because it says more specifically than a gash. And you don't get stitches, which is what I say. You get sutures.
Yeah.
And nowadays they just use tape. Everything's disposable, so they just tape you shut with butterfly bandages. Talking to mechanics. I am at the mercy of mechanics. I have no idea. People always tease me. They say, you don't even know how to change the oil in your car. I said, yes, I do. I take it to Harpo's, I go back in half an hour, and it's changed. I know how to change the oil in my car. But when Harpo's comes out and tells me, this piece and that piece, and it's like, yeah, well, whatever. I hope you're honest, because you could sell me a box of rocks and tell me I needed it, and when it comes to the car, that's what I have to believe. I just realized recently that cars don't have carburetors anymore. So how am I? And if I went to buy a part at a store, they would say to me, "Is this it?" And I said, "No, I don't know. This is what they said. Is that it? Is that it or not?" And God forbid if I would have to put it on. I wouldn't know the first idea. But they have a language that says exactly what things are. Carpenters too, board feet, and we're fixing the garage at St. Pius right now. And the roof is sagging, and we're going to put it in this kind of joint, and we're going to put on this kind of thing. So put it, it's like, whatever, I hope you're a good carpenter because it makes perfect sense to me. So you have committees, that people who know that language to talk to them. But for all of those things, the language carries the meaning. When doctors use that precise, confusing language to us as lay people, they're trying to convey very specific information that's important for your curing and for caring for you. Now, if they talk that way to you, they're just showing off. Because the doctors say, we'll say, you need 7 sutures. No, he's saying, we're going to put 7 stitches. But he's not going to say that on your chart. Because it conveys very specific, important things, and it makes a difference. It makes a difference. And we all do this. We use different language in different circumstances. So amongst our friends, when people say things to you, you go, yeah, whatever. You say those kind of things. I would never say that to somebody I don't know. They ask me a question, I say yes, no. When I was a child, I was taught. My parents would say things like to me, you go, are you coming? I go, yeah. And they go, what? And my mom would say to me, I'm not your friend, I'm your mother. And they go, yes, I'm coming. She expects to have a certain amount of respect in the language that we use for her. When you hit your hand with a hammer, you use a certain set of language that expresses exactly what happened at that moment. Right? You would not use that same language in kindergarten. Or if you did, you get a call. If your kid uses that language in kindergarten, you get a call. Well, little Billy's talking a little rough. Could you kind of... So we use different language in different circumstances, and we're trying to build a language of prayer that is appropriate and expressive of exactly what we want to say. And so when we're developing the language of prayer, we're developing a vocabulary. I always have told and maybe it's because I have studied too long, that really the big step of any kind of study of theology, of psychology, is once you get the vocabulary, you're halfway there. Because you don't have to say long things. Once you know what a fuel injector is, you can just go into the store and say, I need a fuel injector. When you don't, you have to go in and say, well, the thing in the cylinder that looks like this, and it has kind of a nozzle at the end, and it sprays out gas. I need one of those. That's a lot longer roundabout way of saying the same thing. So part of it is we're trying to build a vocabulary of prayer that says what we want to say. We are in the process of setting a formal way of praying aside from our daily life. And from the way that we talk to God when we sit down in our living room or kneel next to our bed. We're setting a formal way of talking to God that we all can use together as a group. The other thing that we're trying to do is we are getting asked to grow in our understanding of the language of prayer. They're saying, yes, are there some hard words in there? Yes. But you can grow. You can learn them. Number one example, consubstantial. But we can do it. Consubstantial will come out just as easy as the other words that we use right now. But we're getting asked to stretch ourselves a little bit. The other thing that's happening is we are trying to reflect a transcendent mystery. A mystery that our minds cannot grasp, our senses cannot enfold, our ears cannot hold, and our tongues cannot express. We're trying to reflect the greatness of the mystery that we celebrate in the language that we use. We're trying to do that with that. So, what's going on? How does this all come about? Well, number one, the reason that we have a new translation is there's a new translation, or there's a new Latin version. If you went to the Vatican in the Pope's library and you wanted to say to the Pope, well, where's the original of all this stuff? He could point to one book on his shelf. He says, that's right. The Tertio Edizione Missalum Romanum. The third edition of the Roman Missal. And we're trying to translate that. Now the Latin version of this Roman Missal, and that's the official prayer of the Church. The Latin version of this was published in 2002. And it is almost 2012 before we have a translation. Almost 2012. Since the publication of the Latin version, the typical edition is what they call it very often when you read. Since the publication of that, the Church has been working on the translation. 10 years to get to a translation that they think is a good translation. Now there are some special problems. For those of you who speak foreign languages or understand foreign language, you know that there are some special problems you encounter when you translate. The first one is trying to capture rhythms. The rhythm of languages is different. Trying to capture the meanings and then the beauty of the original. Of how it flows, of how it goes up, how it goes down. The language, to translate that into a new language that is faithful to the old language, not only in the words, but also in how it goes. So that all of the meaning, because language isn't all just the words, it is the meaning that goes with those words. So to find the best way to translate into English what's there in another language. And it is very hard. I don't know how many of you have ever done translations. It's very difficult to be as beautiful in translation as it is in the original language. The song, as a lot of you might know, Lord, when you came to the seashore, in English, it's a sappy song. No offense, it's very nice, it's a nice song. It was originally written in Spanish. And so we go, Lord, when you came to the seashore. In Spanish it's, Tú has venido la orilla, no has buscado. And it's translated, but the beauty of how that flows with each other is just so different than the English kind of. That's why when we sing bilingual songs, those of you who are from St. Pius, you always go, it doesn't fall right. You're right, because the rhythms of the language are different. So there's a trouble with the rhythm and the meaning. And there are certain words that are hard to translate. Anybody here speak German? Gemütlichkeit. What is that? No, that's fine. Because you know what? There isn't a word in English that fits. Gemütlichkeit is a kind of time that you have with your friends when they gather together. It's a feeling of closeness and camaraderie and celebration, but it isn't any of those things. It's none of those things. It is a special, specific kind of thing for that specific moment in time. You know, it's one of those kind of things where you say if it quacks like a duck and walks like a duck and swims like a duck, it's a duck. You know when Gemütlichkeit is happening, but to try to figure out how to tell somebody else what it is a whole other story. So there are problems with translating. Cariño o querido, more so in Spanish, querido is often translated into English as dear. Querido amigo, dear friend, like at the beginning of the letter. But querido is not quite dear. It's not just respectful sir. It's not love. It's kind of in between there. Closer than friendship, not love. And so, but then, you know, that's a whole sentence to say one word, what they could do with one word in Spanish. And some of these same problems happen between English and Latin. How do you translate the word? The other problem is grammar and structure. Now, those of you of a certain generation, and even up into my generation, we learned grammar, we learned Latin grammar for English. And we have all sorts of rules, like split infinitives. That's a rule in Latin. You can't split infinitives. You know why it's a rule in Latin? Because it's all one word. It's all one word. And so we learned that to say in English, to quickly run to the store, is that correct English? No, you split the infinitive. You took the to away from the verb. The fact of the matter is it's fine to do in English. There's nothing wrong with it, and everybody understands exactly what you're talking about. But it's so the Latin, and then there's a thing in Latin, there's tenses that don't have. There's this thing called the ablative. In the ablative case, allows a phrase to relate to what goes before it and what comes after it. Both. We don't have that in English. We have to make a decision. Does it go before or does it go after? That's why every once in a while in the prayers that we hear, you'll be going along and then you have through Christ our Lord, and it just like doesn't fit. It's like, well, where did that come from? That's the problem with the grammar and the structure. In English, if there is a car outside and that car is blue, how would you say the blank car? You would say the blue car, right? You don't say it that way in Spanish. El carro azul, the car blue. The adjective goes afterwards, not before. Same kind of things in Latin. Latin is a very flexible language. You can put it whatever order you want, basically. And the endings tell you where it belongs in translation in your head into English. And so we have all of those same kind of trouble. The grammar and the structure is different. Word order is different. It's differently important in some languages than others. Some grammatical structures are important in one language and very visible and obvious, but not so much in English. For example, do any of you know what subjunctive is? Subjunctive is the if. If I knew you were coming, I would have baked a cake. That's subjunctive. You can't tell in English, it just doesn't, it's hard to make a mistake with it. The subjunctive exists in English, but it's completely hidden within other things. In other languages, there are special endings that you use, and then they go in combination with other endings that make it make sense. Otherwise, it doesn't. But in English, it's if I knew, that's the subjunctive part. You were coming. You know, I could say you were coming and I made a cake. You don't change any of the words. In Spanish, there are different words with different endings. So if I said, I knew you were coming and I made a cake, supe que vinieron y hizo un pastel. That's, I knew you were coming and I made a cake. But that is saying, like, I didn't make the cake, and if I would have known you were coming, I would have made it. Si supiera que estuvieron viniendo, hiciera un pastel. All different words. Same verb forms, but they have different endings. And so there's those kind of problems of how to make that language work. And so the principle number one of this translation, it is trying to be as faithful as possible to the Latin original. That's the first rule. By trying to be as faithful as possible to the Latin original. Okay? That's kind of simple. The other piece now that we move on to a second rule is biblical roots, allusions, and references. Almost the whole celebration of the Eucharist is a quotation from Scriptures. Almost every part of what we do has some allusion to a biblical story. So, much of our lives use biblical references